St. Jerome, you consider the things that he did during the course of his 78 years, it's incredible, especially back in the early centuries of the church. A little bit about his life and his accomplishments. Jerome was born of well-to-do Christian parents in what is present-day Croatia. His education began at home and was continued in Rome when he was about 12 years old. There he studied grammar, rhetoric, and philosophy. He became a serious scholar of Latin literature and frequently visited the catacombs, and near the end of his Roman education was finally baptized. He spent the next 20 years traveling, and in Germany became very attracted to the monastic life. Yet he ended up working for various scholars and writers, exploring pagan philosophies that were popular at the time. In the Lent of 375, during a near-fatal illness, he had a dream. In that dream, he was dragged before the tribunal of Christ and was accused of being a pagan instead of a Christian, and he was severely whipped. As a result of that dream, he vowed never again to read or possess pagan literature. That year, Jerome began a 2-year search for inner peace as a hermit in the desert. The experience was not altogether successful. He was a novice in the spiritual life, and he had no expert guide. And speaking only Latin, he was confronted with different languages which he did not understand. He experienced deep loneliness, had to beg for food, and resisted temptation by much prayer and fasting. He eventually learned Hebrew from a Jewish convert, studied Greek, had manuscripts copied for his own library and his friends, and carried on many correspondences. A few years later, Jerome quit the desert and went to Antioch, where he was eventually ordained a priest. He was developing a reputation already for being a prominent scholar and monastic figure. He continued his interest in the scriptures and studied them fervently during this time. He improved his knowledge of Greek and Hebrew, which would become important tools for his eventual work. When he returned to Rome, he served as a secretary to Pope Damasus I. There he pursued his scholarly work on the Bible. He wrote some short commentaries after translating the Old Testament book Song of Solomon, and revised the Old Latin versions of the Gospels, and later the book of Psalms. During this time, he also wrote a defense of the perpetual virginity of Mary, Jesus' mother, and he attacked the view of those who proposed that marriage was inferior to the celibate life. He was very critical of the clergy of Rome, who had grown lax in their ministries. This provoked such a storm of criticism that he eventually had to leave Rome after the death of the Pope, and he made his way to the Holy Land. There, Jerome made a religious and archaeological pilgrimage through all of Palestine and to the monastic centers of Egypt. He finally settled in Bethlehem, taking up residence in the cave purported to be the birthplace of Jesus. During his time in Bethlehem, he helped establish a monastery for men, 3 cloisters for women, and a center for pilgrims. For the next 35 years, he worked on translating the scriptures from from Greek and Hebrew into Latin. He wrote 2 introductory works, helpful to biblical scholars, helpful for them to understand the biblical Hebrew. Between the year 391 and 406, he produced a Latin translation of the Old Testament on the basis of the original texts, which was a remarkable effort, considering the fact that he had no real scholarly tools to rely on. His commentary on Ecclesiastes is a milestone because it is the first original Latin commentary that was taken directly from the Hebrew text. Perhaps Jerome's best commentaries are on the minor and major prophets of the Old Testament. As for the New Testament, he translated the Gospel of Matthew from the original Greek and interpreted 4 of Paul's letters, Philemon, Galatians, Ephesians, and the letter to Titus. Weary from his life's travels and work, and burdened by the slow decline of Rome under the invasion of the barbarians, he died at the age of 78. His body was originally buried in Bethlehem, but was later transferred to the Basilica of St. Mary Major in Rome. Jerome is remembered for his extensive understanding of the classics, the Bible, and Christian tradition. He was a learned scholar rather than a deep thinker, and his career was often marked by turbulent times. Yet his influence has been far-reaching and profound on the early Middle Ages in particular, primarily through his translation of the Hebrew and Greek Bibles into Latin, which is still considered the authoritative text for the church. We all have our Bibles at home, and we read them and we study with them and reflect with them. However, we sometimes take them for granted, not recognizing the decades, even the centuries of work that had to be undertaken by saintly people, by scholarly people, so that we have the Bible in its present form today. We forget that we would not be able to share the scriptures without somebody having translated them faithfully from the original manuscripts, which are long gone. So, Jerome is recognized as really the first and foremost biblical scholar. He set the church on this trajectory of taking custody of the scriptures, editing them, putting them in order, the order we have today, and of course translating them into the language that Latin, the official language of the church, and then those translations coming to us in the vernacular. So, although there were many scholars throughout history who were working on the scriptures to bring them to us today, Jerome is again the first and foremost scholar who has given us the great gift of the Word of